أنا دكتور خالد وليد ربان سفينة النجاة إلى شواطئ بكة القدس. I am Dr. Khaled Waleed, the captain of the ship of salvation to the shores of Baka, Jerusalem.
All right, welcome to another deep dive, everybody. And this time, I think we're in for a wild ride.
Yeah, this one's a doozy.
Yeah, this one's a doozy for sure. We've got a really fascinating set of sources for this deep dive. We've got some video lectures. We have some personal notes that somebody took. There's even a study guide with quiz questions and answers on it. It seems like somebody's really been going deep on this particular topic.
Yeah, and they all sort of point in the same direction too. I mean, there's some nuances between each source, but it's pretty clear that whoever put these sources together was really interested in sort of presenting a new way to understand the history of the Torah, the Gospel, and the Quran. Like they're all part of one big story.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like we're piecing together a puzzle here and seeing what picture emerges. And one of the first pieces of this puzzle that really stood out to me was this claim about Israel in the Quran. You know, usually when we hear Israel, we think of, you know, the Israelites.
Right.
But these sources are saying that Israel actually refers to a pre-Adamic race. So like a group of beings that existed before Adam.
Yeah, it's a pretty bold claim, right?
Right.
And not only that, but they're saying that this pre-Adamic Israel had been given a covenant, but they messed it up somehow. They failed to uphold it. And this led to like a corruption, a distortion of the message that they'd been given. It even talks about angels, like witnessing this supposed failure of this pre-Adamic Israel.
Yeah.
And then questioning God's creation of Adam as like a successor.
Okay, hold on. Pre-Adamic Israel, angels questioning God. We're already in some pretty deep water here. But let's just run with this for a minute. If we assume, for the sake of argument, that this pre-Adamic Israel existed, how does the story of Adam and Eve fit into this? You know, like a whole Garden of Eden thing.
Well, that's the thing. The story is still there.
Yeah.
But it takes on a whole new meaning. Like the forbidden tree is no longer just about, you know, disobeying a direct command. It's about interacting with the descendants of this cursed pre-Adamic Israel. So you've got this lineage that's already kind of stained by the consequences of that broken covenant. Right?
So wait, are you saying that the forbidden fruit could have been other beings? I mean, that really changes the whole idea of temptation and the fall, doesn't it?
It does. And it leads to the creation of what these sources call Araba, which represents like a manifestation of sin, something that needs to be avoided. It's like this interpretation adds this whole other layer of complexity to the traditional understanding of good and evil. It goes way beyond, you know, just eating an apple.
Yeah, my head's spinning a little bit, but in a good way. So, okay, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the Torah. These sources, they have a very specific perspective on how the Torah's message has been, you know, passed down throughout history.
Right. The way they present it is the Torah was revealed to Adam initially, but it was constantly being like corrupted and concealed over time. They even claim that like the pharaohs hid the original texts, and then later the Israelites themselves kind of distorted the message after Moses.
So it's like this constant cycle of revelation and then corruption. It makes you wonder how reliable any historical account really is.
Yeah, it really does raise those kinds of questions. But the interesting thing is, even within this interpretation of, you know, constant corruption, there are always glimpses of the true Torah shining through. Like they talk about figures like the prophets Shuaib and Yunus possessing these fragments of the real deal. And then finally with Moses, we see a complete and corrected version being revealed. It's like it brings all the pieces back together.
Okay. That's a fascinating way to frame it. But where do Jesus and Muhammad fit into this revised timeline of revelations?
So in these sources, Jesus is portrayed as kind of a restorer of the forgotten Torah. Like he's reintroducing the stories of the prophets that have been lost or altered over time. And his message, the Injil, or the Gospel, is seen as like a completion of the Torah, not a separate or, you know, competing set of teachings.
So it's like instead of thinking of these as separate religions, they're all part of one continuous thread of revelation.
Exactly. But then, just like the Torah before it, the Injil was also subject to distortion. And they suggest that it's only with Muhammad and the Quran that we get the final, uncorrupted version that preserves and encompasses the truths of both the Torah and Injil.
Okay, so there's this one term that keeps coming up, and I really want to understand it better. This word Yahud, obviously it's connected to the word Jew, but these sources seem to have a very specific point they want to make about its meaning.
Oh, yeah, they definitely do. And understanding what they're saying about Yahud is like crucial to understanding this whole reinterpretation. They argue that the word Yahud actually comes from this Arabic phrase, hudna ilayk, which means we submit to you. And they say that this phrase was uttered by the Israelites when they, formed their own distinct group. Like, it signifies a change in their identity.
So it's not just like a simple ethnic or tribal label. It's about a declaration of submission, like a belief system.
That's the idea. And what's interesting is they connect this to the idea that Yahud implies like a secondary status compared to the original Judah. You could almost think of it like the English suffix ish, like something that's Judish, but not the true authentic Judah.
Okay, so where does that leave the actual Judah then?
Well, this is where things get really interesting. They say that the actual Judah were the Canaanites. The Canaanites are the true indigenous inhabitants of the land, the original Judah and the Israelites. They're kind of Judish.
Wow. That's a bold claim, to say the least. And speaking of bold claims, these sources also have a pretty unconventional take on some familiar biblical figures, Talut, Jalut, and Dawood.
Oh, yeah. The Quranic account of, Saul, Goliath, and David, they suggest reinterpreting those stories through the lens of the Hellenistic period.
So we're not just reinterpreting scripture, we're placing it in a specific historical context.
Exactly. So Talut in this interpretation represents the Ptolemaic rulers of Egypt, who controlled the region at the time. Jalut symbolizes the Seleucid Empire that later dominated Judea. And Dawood, he's not the Israelite king anymore. He becomes the leader of the indigenous resistance, potentially even a Canaanite leader, fighting against Seleucid oppression.
So it's not just David versus Goliath, it's local resistance versus an empire.
Exactly. It completely flips the script.
Wow, this is already a lot to absorb. And we're just getting started. There's this whole concept of dhikr that seems to be central to everything we've talked about so far, and we'll dive into that in part 2, so stay with us. All right, so we're back and ready to tackle this whole dhikr thing. It sounds like it's more than just like remembering stuff.
It is, yeah. It's not just like recalling facts or something. It's more about connecting to this deeper truth, this divine order that underlies everything. These sources present dhikr as like a force. It's a force that pushes back against this chaos and forgetfulness that they see as a problem.
So like a divine safeguard almost, to make sure we don't lose important information.
Think about it. I mean, how easily do stories get twisted over time? How often do details just fade away? These sources are saying that forgetfulness is not just a random thing. It's actually attributed to a negative force. Like they even kind of personify it as Satan's influence, leading to the loss of truth and all that.
Okay, so how does dhikr actually work in practice? Is it like a specific meditation technique or something?
It can involve things like prayer and recitation for sure, but it's bigger than that. Think of historical accounts, landmarks, even just language itself. Anything that serves as a reminder of a deeper truth.
Yeah.
A connection to something greater that could be considered a form of dhikr.
So the Quran, for example,
Yeah.
with its emphasis on the stories of prophets and God's teachings, would that be considered a form of dhikr?
These sources specifically say that the Quran is dhikr. It's not just a text. It's a tool for preserving divine knowledge. It counteracts those forces of forgetfulness that affected previous scriptures. It's a way to ground yourself in the true message, even when you're surrounded by all these different interpretations.
So by engaging with the Quran, by remembering its teachings, you're actively participating in this act of preservation.
That's the idea, yeah. And that brings us to another really interesting connection they make, although it might seem like a bit of a leap at first.
Oh, I love a good leap. Usually means things are about to get really interesting.
Right. So in the middle of all this talk about religion and history, the speaker suddenly starts talking about science and technology.
Wait, hold on. How did we go from ancient prophets to like smartphones and stuff?
It does seem like a kind of sudden shift, but it all ties in, trust me. The speaker's argument is that science and technology are actually forms of magic.
Now, when you say magic, do you mean like actual magic? Or is this more of a metaphor?
More of an analogy, yeah. I mean, think about it. We live in a world where we can like manipulate the physical world with this incredible level of control using laws of physics and chemical formulas and computer code. It's like we understand the rules of reality and we're using them to create specific outcomes.
So instead of casting spells, we're writing code and running experiments.
Yeah.
But it's still manipulating reality in a way, right?
Exactly. The speaker is saying that. This modern magic is what makes our world the best possible world, because we have this degree of control and understanding. Think about things like self-driving cars, antibiotics, reliable food sources, all thanks to understanding and manipulating these rules.
It is pretty mind-blowing when you think about all the stuff we can do with science and technology. But how does this tie back to Deek?
Well, the idea is that.
Yeah.
This understanding, this ability to manipulate the world through science, is also a form of Deek. It's about remembering that underlying order, the rules that govern reality.
Yeah.
And then using them for a purpose.
So even something as, I guess, seemingly secular as science can be connected back to this idea of divine control and the preservation of truth.
That's what the speaker's arguing, yeah. And it gets even more interesting when they connect this to another seemingly unrelated topic.
Yeah.
Depression.
Depression. Okay, now I'm really curious to see how this all fits together. How do we get from Deek and science to, depression?
So the speaker describes depression as this universal human experience, something everyone faces to some degree. And they use this really interesting analogy. They say it's like a dial, not a switch.
A dial. So it's not just like an on-off thing.
Exactly. Everyone experiences depression to some extent. The question is where you fall on that spectrum. It's about managing the intensity and how it affects you, not just the presence or absence of it.
That's a really helpful way to frame it. But
Yeah.
How does this relate to divine control or Deeker?
That's the question, right? That's the question these sources are leaving us with. And it's one that requires some real deep thought. If Deeker is about remembering, about anchoring ourselves to truth, amidst all this chaos, how might that apply to managing our mental and emotional states? Even when we're dealing with something as difficult as depression.
I see what you're getting at. So it's like Deek could be applied not just to, religious texts, but also to our inner world, our thoughts and emotions.
Exactly. It's about finding that connection to a sense of order and purpose, even when things feel chaotic and overwhelming in your own head,
This is really making me think about depression in a whole new way.
Me too. And that's what's so great about this deep dive. We've gone from reinterpretations of religious history to this concept of Deek as this force against forgetting, and then connected that to science and our personal experiences with mental health. It's like we've woven together this tapestry of seemingly random threads. But when you step back and look at the whole picture, it's actually pretty mind-blowing.
I totally agree. And we're not done yet. We still need to explore what all of this means for our understanding of faith, identity, and the relationships between different religious groups. We'll tackle those big questions in part 3, so stick with us. All right, so here we are, the final part of this deep dive, and I gotta say my brain is still processing everything we've covered. I mean, reinterpreting religious history, this Deek thing, is like a force against forgetting, and then somehow connecting that to science and even depression. It's like we've stumbled onto this whole new framework for understanding, well, pretty much everything.
It really has been a wild ride, hasn't it? And what I think makes it so powerful is that it's not just about feeding us information. It's about making us think, challenging us to connect these dots between all these seemingly separate parts of our lives and seeing this potential for unity where we normally see division.
Yeah, exactly. And that leads us to some really big questions that I think these sources kind of hint at but don't really fully answer. Like, if this whole reinterpretation of history is valid, these connections between different faiths are actually real, what does that mean for how we understand our own identities? Our relationships to other people, the possibility of finding common ground.
That's the core of it, right? I mean, think about it. If we accept this idea that there's this continuous thread of revelation running through the Torah, the Gospel, the Quran, it kind of throws a wrench in this whole idea that they're fundamentally separate belief systems, doesn't it?
It does.
It suggests this much deeper level of interconnectedness, this shared origin that could potentially bridge those divides that we so often see between different religious groups.
It's a powerful thought. It makes you wonder, if religious identity is actually more fluid and interconnected than we've traditionally believed.
Yeah.
Does that open up new possibilities for understanding, for empathy, for, just connecting with each other on a deeper level?
It definitely raises those possibilities. Imagine, a world where instead of focusing on all the ways our faiths are different, we actually look for those common threads, the shared values, the underlying message that transcends all those specific labels. This interpretation we've been exploring suggests that kind of common ground actually exists. It's just waiting for us to discover it.
That's a beautiful thought. But I also think it presents some challenges for folks who really strongly identify with a specific religious tradition. This idea that everything's interconnected might not be so easy to swallow. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. It's not like a simple fix. This reinterpretation would require like a real shift in perspectives, a willingness to look beyond just the surface level of those religious texts and really grapple with the deeper meaning, the underlying message that might be shared across all these different traditions.
It's a lot to ask. It takes real open-mindedness, a willingness to question what you think you know and be open to new ways of seeing things. It's not going to happen overnight.
No, definitely not. But it's still worth considering. Even if someone doesn't, end up fully buying into this whole reinterpretation, just the act of wrestling with these ideas can be really valuable. It can help you understand your own beliefs better and appreciate just how complex faith and history really are.
Couldn't agree more. This whole deep dive has really been a journey and, may not give us all the answers, but it's definitely given us a lot to chew on. What stands out to you as the most significant takeaway?
That's a tough one. I think for me, it's got to be the power of this Dick thing, not just as this, religious concept, but as this broader principle for navigating life. This idea of remembering, of holding on to truth and meaning. Even when everything around you feels chaotic and confusing, it's incredibly grounding. It can be really empowering, whether you're facing personal challenges, societal issues, or just struggling with these big questions of faith and identity.
That's beautifully put. It reminds me that this deep dive wasn't just about, ancient religious history. It was about how we understand the world around us and our place in it.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing those connections, the patterns that might not be immediately obvious, but that weave together this whole tapestry of existence.
Well said. Well, folks, I think that about wraps it up for this deep dive. But as always, the conversation doesn't end here. We encourage you to keep thinking about these ideas, maybe check out some of the sources we talked about, and ultimately come to your own conclusion.
Keep questioning, keep seeking, keep connecting those dots, right? That's what the deep dive is all about.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.
أنا دكتور خالد وليد ربان سفينة النجاة إلى شواطئ بكة القدس. I am Dr. Khaled Waleed, the captain of the ship of salvation to the shores of Baka, Jerusalem.